The Tiger II's 88mm cannon was bearing down on Private First Class Tommy "Lucky" O'Brien's Sherman tank when the Irish-American farm boy from Kentucky realized his grandmother's horseshoe, the one she'd nailed above the barn door for 60 years of good luck, was either going to deflect the German armor-piercing shell that was screaming toward his driver's hatch at 2,900 feet per second, or become the last thing he'd ever see before 22 pounds of hardened steel turned his coffin into his actual grave. "Tommy, incoming!" Staff Sergeant Mike Kowalski screamed from the gunner's position as the massive German Tiger II tank adjusted its aim through the smoke and chaos of the Ardennes forest, where SS Oberfuhrer Heinrich "Iron Wolf" Brenner had been systematically hunting American armor with the deadliest tank in the German arsenal, a 68-ton monster that had never lost a direct engagement and was about to add another kill to Brenner's perfect record of 89 consecutive tank destroys without a single miss. The mathematical reality was brutal and undeniable. Brenner's Tiger II weighed more than twice as much as Tommy's Sherman M4A1 and carried frontal armor 185mm thick compared to the Sherman's pathetic 76mm maximum protection. The German tank's 88mm cannon fired shells at muzzle velocities exceeding 3,000 feet per second with enough kinetic energy to punch through Allied armor like tissue paper, continue through the rear plate, and incinerate everything inside while often launching turrets 50 feet into the air. Tommy's Sherman, serial number 3085847, had earned its nickname, Coffin, through a reputation that made veteran tank crews cross themselves and request transfers rather than crew the cursed vehicle that had killed or wounded 7 different teams in 6 months of European combat. The tank's mechanical failures, ammunition explosions, and catastrophic battle damage had convinced every mechanic in the 3rd Armored Division that the Sherman was jinxed beyond redemption. But what the German tank ace didn't know was that Tommy O'Brien's Sherman M4A1, nicknamed Coffin by every mechanic who'd worked on its shot-up hull, carried more than just luck. It carried the accumulated superstitions of 3 generations of Irish farmers who understood that sometimes survival depended not on firepower or armor thickness, but on believing that the right charm could turn certain death into miraculous escape when logic and military doctrine offered no hope. "Mike, that horseshoe ain't just decoration," Tommy shouted as he worked the Sherman's controls with the desperate precision of a man who'd grown up understanding that machinery and luck were partners in keeping people alive under impossible circumstances. "My grandma said it would protect anyone who trusted it, and I'm about to find out if 60 years of Kentucky horse luck can stop German steel." The horseshoe that was about to change everything had been forged in 1884 by Tommy's great-grandfather, Patrick O'Brien, who'd learned blacksmithing in County Cork before immigrating to Kentucky and establishing a horse farm that had survived the Civil War, Reconstruction, the Great Depression, and every natural disaster that had threatened to destroy 3 generations of O'Brien determination and Irish stubbornness. The specific piece of iron mounted above Tommy's driver position had come from Thunder, a Kentucky thoroughbred stallion that had saved Patrick O'Brien's life during a barn fire by refusing to leave his stall until the blacksmith had escaped from collapsing timbers that would have crushed him. Patrick had forged Thunder's final horseshoe using techniques passed down through generations of Irish metalworkers, creating a piece of protection that carried both craftsmanship and gratitude for the horse that had saved the O'Brien family line from extinction. If stories of family traditions and battlefield miracles move you, hit that subscribe button. These accounts show what happens when old-world superstitions meet modern warfare, proving that sometimes the most unlikely objects become the difference between death and survival when everything else has failed. The cursed tank that everyone feared had earned its nickname, Coffin, through a reputation for mechanical failures, crew casualties, and battlefield disasters that had convinced every mechanic in the 3rd Armored Division that the Sherman M4A1 bearing serial number 3085847 was jinxed beyond redemption and destined to kill anyone foolish enough to crew it during combat operations. Tommy O'Brien's Sherman had been through 7 different crews in 6 months of European combat, with each previous team either killed, wounded, or transferred after experiencing mechanical failures and enemy encounters that defied statistical probability and suggested supernatural intervention working against American survival. The tank's original crew had been killed by a German Panzerfaust during the Normandy breakout when Sergeant Danny McNeil had opened his hatch to observe enemy positions and taken a rocket-propelled grenade directly to the head. The second crew had suffered catastrophic transmission failure under fire near St. Vith when the Sherman's drive train had seized solid during a retreat under German artillery bombardment, leaving the crew stranded in a kill zone where they'd been forced to abandon their vehicle and run for their lives through mud and shrapnel. The third crew had been wounded when the tank's ammunition exploded after taking a glancing hit from an 88mm shell that should have bounced off harmlessly but instead ignited the main gun rounds and filled the fighting compartment with burning propellant. The fourth crew had experienced simultaneous failure of the tank's electrical system, hydraulic controls, and radio communications during their first combat mission, creating a mechanical crisis that left them blind, deaf, and helpless in the middle of a German counterattack that destroyed 2 other Shermans before Coffin could be recovered by Allied forces. The fifth crew had been transferred after their tank commander suffered a nervous breakdown and refused to enter the vehicle, claiming that he could hear voices of dead tankers warning him to stay away from the cursed Sherman. The sixth crew had lasted only 3 days before requesting immediate reassignment after experiencing brake failure that nearly sent their tank over a cliff, engine fires that started without apparent cause, and ammunition malfunctions that jammed their main gun during a firefight with German armor. The seventh crew had been wounded when Coffin's turret traverse mechanism had malfunctioned and trapped the gunner's arm during manual rotation, breaking bones that required medical evacuation and surgical repair. By the time Tommy and his crew inherited Coffin in December 1944, the tank's reputation was so notorious that replacement crews were selected through a process that resembled punishment detail rather than normal assignment procedures. No experienced tank commander wanted the cursed Sherman, which meant that green crews like Tommy's were stuck with equipment that seemed designed to kill its occupants through mechanical malfunction or enemy action. O'Brien, Captain Robert Hayes had said when assigning Tommy to the infamous tank, his voice carrying the reluctant authority of an officer who understood that he was essentially signing death warrants for inexperienced crews. "I'm not going to lie to you about this machine. 7 different crews have been killed or wounded in that Sherman, and every mechanic in the division says it's cursed. But we need every tank we can get for the Ardennes offensive, and you're the only driver left without an assignment." The mechanical history of Coffin included engine failures during combat, transmission problems under fire, electrical shorts that disabled critical systems, ammunition explosions from minor hits, and structural failures that had weakened the tank's armor protection. But the psychological impact of the cursed reputation was even more devastating than the mechanical problems, because crews who expected their tank to fail often made fatal mistakes during combat when confidence in their equipment was essential for survival. Tommy had grown up on a horse farm in the Kentucky bluegrass region, where his grandmother had taught him that luck was something you made through hard work, preparation, and respect for the traditions that had kept the O'Brien family alive through generations of hardship that had tested Irish determination and American resilience. When he'd enlisted in the Army in 1943, his grandmother had insisted that he take the horseshoe that had protected their barn for 60 years. "Tommy boy," Grandmother O'Brien had said while pressing the iron horseshoe into his hands during their farewell at the train station in Louisville, her voice carrying the accumulated wisdom of an Irish woman who had lived through the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, and 2 world wars. "This shoe came from Thunder, the stallion that saved your great-grandfather's life during a barn fire in 1885. It's been over our door ever since, and not one O'Brien has died unnatural while it was watching over us. You nail it inside that tank, and it'll watch over you too." The horseshoe was 7 inches long, hand-forged from Kentucky iron by Patrick O'Brien using techniques that had been passed down through generations of Irish blacksmiths who understood that metalwork was both craft and magic when done with the right intentions and proper respect for the materials. The iron bore the distinctive marks of hammer work and fire tempering that gave it strength beyond modern manufacturing while carrying the accumulated luck of 60 years protecting O'Brien family members from harm. Tommy had mounted the horseshoe above his driver's position using steel wire and determination, creating a makeshift shrine that drew mockery from other tank crews but provided psychological comfort during the terrifying moments when German armor appeared on the battlefield and survival depended more on luck than skill. The horseshoe had become Tommy's most prized possession, more valuable than ammunition or rations because it represented family protection and Irish tradition applied to American warfare. But the real test of the horseshoe's protective power had come when Tommy's crew encountered SS Oberfuhrer Heinrich Brenner, whose Tiger II tank had established a reputation for invincibility that demoralized Allied tank crews throughout the European theater of operations. The unstoppable German ace who never missed had built his legend through 18 months of armored warfare that had produced 89 confirmed tank kills without suffering a single defeat or tactical withdrawal, establishing Heinrich Brenner as the most feared individual tank commander on the Western Front and the personal nemesis of Allied armored units throughout the European theater of operations. Heinrich Brenner was 32 years old, a career SS officer who had commanded tanks since the 1941 invasion of Russia and had developed tactical methods that maximized the Tiger II's overwhelming advantages in firepower, protection, and range through mathematical precision and psychological intimidation that demoralized Allied tank crews before engagements even began. Brenner's approach to tank combat was methodical and ruthless. He positioned his Tiger at maximum effective range, identified enemy weaknesses through careful observation, then delivered precise shots that destroyed Allied tanks before they could respond effectively. Brenner's combat record was legendary even by German standards: 34 confirmed kills during the Battle of Kursk, where his original Tiger I had destroyed an entire Soviet tank battalion single-handedly, 28 British tank destroys during the Normandy campaign, including a legendary engagement where he'd eliminated 6 Cromwell tanks in 40 seconds, and 27 American Sherman kills during the current Ardennes offensive, each achieved with a single shot that had penetrated enemy armor and killed entire crews instantaneously. The Tiger II that Brenner commanded was the most advanced tank in the world, representing the pinnacle of German engineering and metallurgical expertise applied to armored warfare. The 68-ton monster carried frontal armor 185 mm thick that made it essentially invulnerable to any Allied anti-tank weapon currently deployed in Europe, while its 88 mm cannon could penetrate any enemy tank's protection at ranges exceeding 3,000 yards. Brenner's gunnery technique was based on principles that he had developed through analysis of his 89 successful tank kills, using mathematical calculations that eliminated guesswork and reduced tank-on-tank combat to a series of precise measurements and mechanical procedures. He accounted for range, target movement, wind conditions, ammunition temperature, barrel wear, and atmospheric pressure to achieve accuracy levels that approached mechanical perfection under combat conditions. Target acquired: Sherman tank, range 1,200 meters, Brenner announced to his crew in the clinical tone that had become his trademark during 89 successful tank engagements across the Eastern and Western fronts, his voice carrying the absolute confidence of a commander who had never failed to destroy an enemy tank within effective firing range. Standard engagement profile: 1 shot, 1 kill. This will be number 90. Brenner's Tiger II was positioned on high ground overlooking the frozen valley outside Bastogne, where American tank formations were attempting to break through German defensive positions and relieve the encircled 101st Airborne Division during the most critical phase of the Battle of the Bulge. The tactical situation favored German forces in every measurable way: elevation advantage that extended effective firing range, superior firepower that guaranteed penetration of Allied armor, thicker protection that rendered enemy return fire ineffective, and crew experience that had been proven through nearly 2 years of continuous combat against Soviet and Allied forces. The psychological impact of Brenner's reputation was as devastating as his physical firepower, because Allied tank crews throughout the European theater understood that encountering the Iron Wolf meant almost certain death regardless of their own tactical skill or mechanical competence. Radio intercepts had revealed that American tank commanders would abort missions rather than engage Brenner's Tiger II, creating tactical advantages that extended far beyond individual tank engagements. But Brenner had never encountered an opponent like Tommy O'Brien, whose understanding of luck and family traditions was about to prove that sometimes mechanical superiority could be defeated by forces that weren't described in any military manual or tactical doctrine developed through conventional warfare experience. The German tank ace was about to discover that Irish superstition could be more effective than German precision when properly applied under combat conditions where mathematical calculations failed to account for supernatural intervention. The tactical geometry of the engagement favored Brenner in every way that mattered in armored warfare. His Tiger II occupied commanding terrain that provided excellent observation and fields of fire, while Tommy's Coffin was trapped in low ground with limited maneuverability and no cover or concealment available for protection against German firepower. The range was optimal for Tiger II gunnery while being beyond effective firing distance for the Sherman's weaker 76mm cannon. The impossible shot that changed everything began at 1,347 hours on December 23, 1944, when Brenner's Tiger II achieved perfect firing position against Tommy's Coffin at a range where German victory was mathematically guaranteed and Allied survival was essentially impossible according to every ballistic calculation that mattered in armored warfare. "Tommy, we're dead," Mike Kowalski shouted from the gunner's position as Brenner's 88mm cannon swiveled toward their Sherman with the mechanical precision that had killed 89 previous Allied tank crews without missing a single shot. "That Tiger's got us zeroed in from perfect position. We can't penetrate his armor, we can't outrun him, and we can't hide from him." The tactical mathematics were brutal and undeniable. Tommy's Sherman M4A1 weighed 32 tons and carried 76mm of frontal armor that might as well have been paper against the Tiger II's 88mm cannon. The German tank could destroy the Sherman from ranges exceeding 2,000 yards while remaining invulnerable to return fire, creating an engagement envelope where American survival depended on factors beyond human control. But Tommy wasn't thinking about ballistics or armor penetration values. He was thinking about his grandmother's stories about Thunder the Stallion and the horseshoe that had protected 3 generations of O'Brien family members through every crisis that had threatened to destroy their Kentucky horse farm. The iron above his head represented more than superstition, it represented family tradition and accumulated luck that had never failed when properly respected and trusted. "Mike, trust the shoe," Tommy yelled as he maneuvered the Sherman through a maneuver that no tank manual had ever described, using instincts that came from growing up around horses and understanding that sometimes survival required believing in protection that couldn't be measured or quantified through conventional methods. Tommy's plan was to present the Sherman's frontal armor at an angle that would maximize the horseshoe's position relative to incoming German fire while using the tank's mobility to create a moving target that would complicate Brenner's gunnery calculations. The technique required precise timing and absolute faith in family tradition, because failure meant certain death for Tommy and his crew. The German shell that should have killed everything was fired at 1,348 hours when Brenner achieved perfect sight alignment on Tommy's Sherman and squeezed the trigger with the confidence that came from never missing a shot at tactical ranges where German firepower advantage was absolute and Allied survival was mathematically impossible. The 22-pound armor-piercing shell screamed across 1,200 yards of frozen Belgian countryside at 3,000 feet per second, carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through the Sherman's 76mm frontal armor and continue through the rear plate while incinerating everything inside the vehicle. The trajectory was perfect, the range was confirmed by optical rangefinder, the target was stationary, and wind conditions were negligible. Circumstances that guaranteed success according to every principle of tank gunnery that Brenner had mastered through 89 previous victories. The ballistic calculations were flawless and the mechanical execution was perfect, representing the culmination of German metallurgical science, precision manufacturing, and tactical expertise applied to armored warfare. The tungsten-core armor-piercing shell had been manufactured to tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, while the 88mm cannon had been engineered to deliver projectiles with mechanical accuracy that exceeded human capabilities. But Tommy O'Brien's grandmother's horseshoe was mounted at exactly the angle necessary to deflect the German shell by 3 inches, just enough to send the armor-piercing round past Tommy's driver's hatch and through the Sherman's engine compartment without hitting any critical systems or crew members. The iron that had been forged in Kentucky and blessed by 60 years of O'Brien family tradition had turned certain death into miraculous escape through forces that no military engineer had ever calculated or German ballistics expert had anticipated. The physics of the deflection were impossible according to conventional understanding of armored warfare, because the horseshoe's iron composition and mounting position shouldn't have been sufficient to alter the trajectory of a high-velocity anti-tank round traveling at 3 times the speed of sound. But the combination of angle, metallurgy, and accumulated luck had created a deflection surface that changed the shell's path by exactly the margin necessary to save Tommy's life. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Tommy screamed as the German shell whistled past his head with a sound like an express train and exited through the Sherman's rear armor, leaving a tunnel through the tank that should have killed everyone inside but had instead created a perfect demonstration of Irish luck applied to German ballistics and supernatural protection defeating scientific precision. The deflection that saved Tommy's life was measured in inches, but the psychological impact was enormous and immediate. For the first time in his combat career, Heinrich Brenner had fired a perfect shot at an enemy tank and failed to achieve a kill, creating a crisis of confidence that would affect his gunnery for the remainder of the engagement and ultimately destroy his reputation as Germany's most effective tank commander. Unmöglich! Brenner shouted through the Tiger's intercom as he watched his armor-piercing shell pass through the American Sherman without destroying it, his voice reflecting the shock and disbelief of a professional soldier whose mathematical precision had been defeated by forces that German tactical doctrine had never anticipated. The shot was perfect. Range confirmed by optical measurement, deflection calculated to the millimeter, target stationary, wind conditions negligible. How did they survive a direct hit? Brenner's crew was equally confused by the apparent failure of German ballistics and gunnery expertise that had never failed during 89 previous tank engagements. They had watched their commander achieve consecutive kills using identical procedures, and the failure to destroy the American Sherman suggested either catastrophic mechanical malfunction or enemy capabilities that German intelligence had never identified or analyzed. The Tiger II's sophisticated fire control system had performed exactly as designed, with range-finding equipment providing accurate distance measurements, ballistic computers calculating optimal firing solutions, and mechanical systems delivering the shell with precision that should have been sufficient to destroy any Allied tank. But the supernatural protection provided by Tommy's horseshoe had rendered German technological superiority ineffective through intervention that transcended military engineering. But the horseshoe's protection had done more than save Tommy's life. It had created a tactical opportunity for the outgunned American crew to respond with their own firepower while the German crew was distracted by their unexpected failure to achieve a kill with their first shot. The psychological advantage had shifted from the Germans to the Americans in the span of 3 seconds. "Mike, put one right through his gun mantlet while he's still figuring out what happened," Tommy commanded as he positioned the Sherman for the return shot that would determine whether Irish luck could defeat German armor or whether Brenner's second shot would correct whatever had caused his first round to miss. The American response shot was fired at 1,349 hours when Mike Kowalski used the Sherman's 76mm cannon to target the Tiger II's gun mantlet, the weakest point in the German tank's frontal armor and the only location where Allied firepower had any chance of penetrating Brenner's seemingly invulnerable vehicle. The 76mm armor-piercing shell struck the Tiger II's gun mantlet at the precise moment when Brenner was rotating his turret for a second shot, creating internal shock waves that jammed the German tank's turret traverse mechanism and rendered the 88mm cannon inoperable. For the first time in his career, Heinrich Brenner's tank had suffered mechanical failure during combat, leaving him vulnerable to further American attack. But the real victory was psychological rather than mechanical. The legendary German tank ace who had never missed a shot or suffered equipment failure had been defeated by a combination of Irish luck and American determination that proved tank warfare was about more than ballistics and armor thickness when family traditions and battlefield courage were properly combined. The legend that lived forever began when word of Tommy O'Brien's miraculous survival spread through the 3rd Armored Division and transformed the cursed coffin from a jinx death trap into the luckiest tank in the European theater of operations, creating a psychological shift that affected American tank crews throughout the remainder of the war. "O'Brien," Captain Hayes said during the post-battle debriefing, his voice carrying the amazement of an experienced officer who had witnessed something that challenged every assumption about armored warfare and mechanical probability. "I've been in tank combat for 18 months, and I've never seen anything like what happened out there. You took a direct hit from an 88 at point-blank range and walked away without a scratch. How do you explain surviving something that should have vaporized your entire crew?" Tommy's answer became part of 3rd Armored Division folklore and established the O'Brien horseshoe as the most famous good luck charm in American armored forces, inspiring superstitious rituals and protective traditions throughout Allied tank units. "Captain, my grandmother's horseshoe has been protecting O'Brien family members for 60 years, and it wasn't about to stop working just because we're fighting Germans instead of barn fires." The transformation of Coffin from cursed tank to lucky charm was immediate, complete, and psychologically powerful for American tank crews who had been demoralized by German armor superiority and needed to believe that survival was possible even when facing overwhelming enemy advantages. Tank crews throughout the division began requesting assignment to Tommy Sherman, understanding that service with the O'Brien horseshoe offered better protection than additional armor plating or improved mechanical reliability. Within 48 hours of the Tiger II encounter, Coffin had been visited by over 200 American tank crewmen who wanted to touch the horseshoe for luck before their own combat missions. The iron that had once been Thunder's shoe became a pilgrimage destination for superstitious soldiers who understood that warfare involved forces beyond mechanical engineering and that supernatural protection was more reliable than military equipment when properly respected. The psychological impact extended beyond individual superstition to create tactical advantages that affected entire tank engagements. American crews who served alongside Tommy's Coffin fought with increased confidence and aggressiveness, believing that the horseshoe's protection extended to nearby friendly units and that Irish luck could defeat German precision when properly applied under combat conditions. But more importantly, the horseshoe's success had demonstrated that sometimes survival in combat depended on factors that couldn't be measured by military engineers or quantified through ballistic calculations. Faith, family tradition, and accumulated luck were weapons that enemy firepower couldn't defeat when properly applied by soldiers who understood that warfare was about more than equipment specifications and tactical doctrine. Tommy's grandmother's horseshoe continued to protect Coffin and its crew through the remainder of the European campaign, deflecting or disrupting enemy fire on 7 additional occasions while never failing to bring the O'Brien luck to bear against German attempts to destroy the tank that had become the most famous Sherman in the American Army. Each subsequent survival reinforced the horseshoe's legendary reputation and provided psychological strength for Allied tank crews facing superior German equipment. The ripple effects of the horseshoe's protection created a crisis of confidence within German armored units as reports spread that American tanks could survive direct hits from Tiger II cannons through supernatural means that German tactical doctrine couldn't explain or counter. The psychological impact on enemy morale was as significant as any physical damage that Allied firepower could inflict on German equipment. Heinrich Brenner never recovered from his failure to destroy Tommy Sherman, and his subsequent gunnery performance declined rapidly as psychological pressure undermined the confidence that had sustained his perfect combat record. Within 2 weeks of the horseshoe incident, Brenner had missed 3 more shots at ranges where accuracy should have been guaranteed, leading to his reassignment to training duties where his failing skills couldn't compromise German tactical effectiveness. The scientific explanation that nobody wanted was provided by Army ordnance experts who analyzed the German shell that had passed through Tommy's tank and concluded that the horseshoe's iron composition and mounting angle had created a deflection surface that altered the armor-piercing round's trajectory by exactly the amount necessary to avoid critical vehicle systems and crew positions. The horseshoe acted as an improvised deflector plate, Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison explained during a technical briefing that was classified to prevent German intelligence from learning how Allied luck could defeat German ballistics. The angle of the iron relative to the incoming shell created a deflection force that changed the projectile's path by 3 inches, exactly enough to save the crew's lives while maintaining tank mobility and combat effectiveness. But Tommy and his crew preferred his grandmother's explanation that carried more psychological weight and provided better morale support than scientific analysis. Thunder's shoe has been protecting O'Brien family members since 1884, and it wasn't about to let a German tank commander break that record. The supernatural explanation was more comforting than the mechanical one, and it provided psychological strength that helped Tommy's crew continue fighting when mathematical probability suggested they should have been dead. The horseshoe's fame spread beyond the 3rd Armored Division to become part of American military folklore that inspired soldiers throughout the European theater. Stories of Irish luck defeating German precision provided hope for troops who faced overwhelming enemy advantages and needed to believe that survival was possible even when conventional military analysis suggested otherwise. Heinrich Brenner never recovered from his failure to destroy Tommy Sherman, and his subsequent gunnery performance declined rapidly as psychological pressure undermined the confidence that had sustained his perfect combat record. Within 2 weeks of the horseshoe incident, Brenner had missed 3 more shots at ranges where accuracy should have been guaranteed, leading to his reassignment to training duties where his failing skills couldn't compromise German tactical effectiveness. The ripple effects of the horseshoe's protection extended throughout German armored units as word spread that American tanks could survive direct hits from Tiger II cannons through means that German tactical doctrine couldn't explain or counter. The psychological impact on German tank crews was immediate and devastating, creating doubts about Wehrmacht invincibility that had sustained German military morale through years of increasingly desperate warfare. But for Tommy O'Brien, the victory was personal rather than strategic. He had used his grandmother's protection to survive an encounter with the deadliest tank commander in the German army, proving that family traditions and Irish luck could overcome superior enemy equipment when applied with faith and courage under extreme pressure. The post-war legacy that outlasted victory extended far beyond one tank battle to establish the principle that soldiers carried their family strength into combat regardless of the enemy they faced or the equipment they used. After the war, Tommy returned to Kentucky and took over his family's horse farm, using the mechanical skills he'd learned in the army to modernize agricultural equipment while never forgetting that his grandmother's horseshoe had saved his life during the most dangerous moment of his military service. The horseshoe was returned to its place above the barn door, where it continued protecting O'Brien family members for the next generation. The human story that made it all meaningful was preserved in letters between Tommy and his grandmother, documenting not just the technical details of tank warfare but the family traditions and accumulated wisdom that had enabled a Kentucky farm boy to defeat German military precision through faith in protective forces that couldn't be measured by military science. Grandma, Tommy wrote in a letter from Europe after the Tiger II encounter, "Your horseshoe saved my life and my crew's lives when a German tank had us dead to rights. Thunder's shoe deflected an 88mm shell that should have killed us all. 60 years of O'Brien luck stopped German steel, just like you said it would." Grandmother O'Brien's response revealed the connection between family tradition and survival that had sustained rural American families through generations of hardship. "Tommy boy, I told you that horseshoe would watch over you because it's been watching over O'Brien family members since your great-grandfather forged it from Kentucky iron. Some things are stronger than bullets and armor, and family protection is one of them." The scientific analysis of Tommy's survival was less important than the demonstration that American soldiers carried their family strength into battle and that sometimes the most unlikely objects became weapons against enemy forces when faith and family tradition were properly applied under combat conditions. Tommy O'Brien proved that tank warfare was about more than firepower and armor thickness when soldiers understood that survival depended on factors that couldn't be quantified through military engineering but had been proven through generations of family experience under pressure. His victory demonstrated that American democracy's greatest strength was the diversity of traditions and beliefs that soldiers brought from their civilian lives into military service. So here's the question Tommy O'Brien's story poses. When facing overwhelming enemy capabilities, how do you find strength in family traditions that seem disconnected from modern warfare? What drives an American soldier to trust his grandmother's horseshoe more than military doctrine when his life depends on making the right decision under fire? And how do family protective forces become military assets when applied with faith and courage during moments of extreme danger? Tommy O'Brien proved that the most effective armor is sometimes not the thickest steel plate but the accumulated protection of family traditions that have been tested through generations of hardship and proven reliable when everything else fails under pressure.